Vale la pena. Vale la pena is a Spanish phrase that is often loosely translated to be worth it. It's worth it. Vale, it's worth. La pena literally means the pain. It gets translated, it's worth it. But it literally means it's worth the pain. If we want to know, is something worth it? Is it worthwhile? Well, we have to ask ourselves then perhaps, what does it cost? How much is it? What are you willing to give in exchange for something? That's what tells us how much it's worth, what its value is. Is it worth the price, the pain? Often today, of course, that's money. I work a certain amount of hours at my job and I get a certain amount of money. And so when I go to the store to decide if I want to buy something, I have to say, wow, that's an entire a week's worth of salary. That's a month's salary for me to buy this, or, this big purchase. It's several years of work. That's how we determine what's it worth. So I look at this question of vale la pena, is it worth it? I think about the value that we place upon, first of all, our country and our freedom. If you watch the news a lot, the news has, a vested interest in kind of keeping us stirred up about things that are wrong with the country, things that need improvement. And certainly there are things that need improvement, but sometimes I get the feeling that, you would think this is just the worst place in the whole world, just full of all these imperfections and problems. And, you might begin to think that not only is the United States not a very good place, but probably other places, if not every other place, must be better, because obviously the news told us so. Well, here's the thing, though, that the news long ceased being the news. It's entertainment now, and entertainment is designed to keep you locked in and watching. And why? The big answer of why is so that you will feel like you need to keep watching the terrible stories on the news, so that you will stay tuned in, and ultimately the purpose of the news is so you will buy whatever they're advertising in the commercials in between all the bad news. Problem is, we can start to believe that maybe this country isn't so great. Maybe it's not worth it. What value really is this country? Que vale la pena? What's it worth? Is it worth it? Well, on this Memorial Day, this is where I always kind of go when I feel down and wondering about what's it all worth. From the time I was young, on Memorial Day weekend, I would go with my Boy Scout troop to the National Cemetery in Leavenworth and put a little American flag on the grave of each veteran. Then when I studied canon law in Washington, D.C., one of my favorite places to go for inspiration was to Arlington National Cemetery. And there are so many graves of American servicemen and women there that I can't even take them all in or see them at once. Sometimes I would go and, inspect an individual grave, maybe a Medal of Honor winner, maybe a president, someone famous. But more than anything, what I got from Arlington was just a sense of looking out over all those graves, and I got a great sense of the value of our country and our freedom. Because there before me and surrounding me all around are people that say, vale la pena. It's worth the pain. In fact, it's worth dying for, this country of ours. You want to know what something's worth? Look at what it cost. In a society today where people try to avoid pain at all price, will do anything to avoid suffering. Arlington, the National Cemetery in Leavenworth, is filled with people who almost want to shout out to me, not only that it's worth paying, but it's worth dying for, this supposed imperfect country of ours. If ever I get down and wonder, is it all worth it? I went to Arlington, and there just sat, it's a place of gravitas, of weight. It's a great weightiness in Arlington, because all around the graves are telling you it's worth it. Vale, Pena, this country of ours. It's someone famous, once said, in the face of all this kind of talking down the country, that, the United States is the worst system of government, except for all the others. We do get this negative feeling sometimes, and that's when, on this Memorial Day, I think back to putting those flags on graves. And if you want to know what's it worth, even here, you don't have to go to Arlington. You can go right out to our parish cemetery here. And just yesterday, some of the veterans came out and put flags on some of the graves of those who served. There's a little display on the front lawn of flags honoring those who gave their lives. The last full measure of devotion, Abraham Lincoln said at Gettysburg. It gives me a great sense of weightiness. It's worth it. Our country, our freedom. You want to know what it's worth? Look at what it cost. The deaths of thousands, hundreds of thousands of American servicemen and women who never met you, who never met me, and who we will never meet. And yet from the grave, scream out to us, this country, it's worth it. It's worth dying for. What could be of greater worth than to say, my whole life I will give for this one thing? Vale Pena. It's worth it. As I think about those men and women who died so that we could have the temporal freedom to live as Americans, I can't help but then also think about the fact that so many of those people are Christians. If you go to the cemeteries in Normandy in France, you see that they're not just plain white tombstones, but crosses, rows upon rows of crosses, and some non-Christians too. But even amongst those crosses, so many of them are Catholic. A huge, disproportionate percentage of our armed services is made up of Catholics. I wonder why. What's the connection? And then I thought about this, being willing to give one's life for one's friends. Jesus says there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And I thought about how every time we come into a Catholic church, we are faced with a crucifix. That's actually required for Mass, that there be a crucifix. Not a plain cross, but the instructions for Mass say it must be a cross with the image of Christ crucified on it. I think especially when non-Catholics come into our church, and especially like at St. Pat's here, where we have this huge crucifix, it might be a little off-putting. Why is that there? Well, I thought about that as I reflected upon, is it worth it? What's it worth? What does it cost? It's true that all those men and women buried in Arlington, many of them died for the country. But every time we come into a Catholic church, we see a crucifix, and we're reminded that God thought we were worth it, that we were of such great value that it was worth dying for us. That's what Jesus on the cross ultimately speaks to us. You're worth it. Jesus looks down on us from the cross, and we know that the nails don't keep Jesus on the cross. He's not an ordinary thief that's, just bound there helpless. Jesus could have come down from the cross at any moment. He could have answered those taunting him, saying, "Come down from that cross." He could have immediately wiped everybody out. So it's not the nails that keep Jesus on the cross. Rather, we look at Jesus on the cross, and during all that pain and suffering, we see the holes in his hands and his feet, his side open, blood coming down everywhere, crowned with thorns. His thorns press into his head and blood runs down his face. And we might ask ourselves, what could possibly keep Jesus there enduring all that pain and suffering and ultimately death? Well, I have to think that he looks out from the cross and sees you and I and all of humanity, and he simply says, "You're worth it. You are of such great value that I would endure all this pain and suffering, and yes, even death, because you are worth it." And I think we need to hear that, each of us individually in the singular, not just, oh yeah, the world in general was worth the death of God. No, you individually, as if you're the only person that ever lived. Jesus looks down from the cross and sees you. Yes, you and all your miserable sinfulness, suffering, your imperfection, all the ways that we deny God 7 times a day at least. Jesus sees all that, all the pain and suffering, all our rejection, all the ways that humanity turns its back against God, and yes, all the ways that you individually sin. He looks at you from the cross and says, "You are worth it. Tu vales la pena. You're worth the pain." Think then, if those soldiers buried in our cemeteries give a weightiness to how much our country is worth it. Think how much the death of Jesus, looking at a crucifix, should remind us of how much our souls are worth it. Let us be incredibly thankful then for the great gift that has been given us from those who fought and died for our temporal freedom that we celebrate on this Memorial Day. You want to know what it's worth? Go to a cemetery filled with flags this weekend. Take a visit to our cemetery after Mass. Say thank you. But then, even more important than that, let's realize that we are of such great value that God died for us. That's how much you're worth. I'll leave you with this final image, though. As much as Jesus might say from the cross, "You're worth it," that he would die for you, I think there is within that then a call to do something. If all these people died for our country, we can at least put a flag on their grave and honor them on Memorial Day. But more than that, we should honor them by the way we live with the freedom that they died to give us. One of my favorite movies is the Steven Spielberg masterpiece, Saving Private Ryan. This starred Tom Hanks as Captain Miller, the CEO of a platoon of soldiers who basically, what happens is Private Ryan has several brothers who are all killed in World War II fighting, and he's the last one of his brothers. And so they find this out and they decide they're not going to send another death letter to the Ryan family, to his mother. So they're going to send an entire platoon of soldiers on a rescue mission to get Private Ryan out of the battle and home safe. So Tom Hanks, Captain Miller, leads this group. And what ultimately happens is that so many of this platoon, they get killed and wiped out trying to save this one person. And when they finally find Private Ryan, he has to ask, am I really worth this? Am I worth it that an entire group of soldiers gets out of the battle to just go get me? Am I worth that much? Well, of course, the answer is yes. These men know that it's their duty, so they go and they find Private Ryan, and they're bringing him out to safety when eventually, one of my favorite scenes in the movie, Tom Hanks is mortally wounded, and as he's lying on the bridge, dying, after everything they've done to get Private Ryan to safety, Tom Hanks is dying on the bridge just as help arrives, and he grabs Private Ryan by his lapels and pulls him in, and he says to him, "James, earn this, earn it. I think, although Jesus might not say that to us from the cross, because he doesn't need anything from us, but maybe in the light of everything that Jesus has done for us, maybe we should live our life in such a way that we could hear Jesus say to us, earn this. As we look at the cross and see what Jesus did for us, earn it. As we look at our cemeteries this weekend full of flags of our beloved war dead who fought to give us the freedom to live in a country where we can criticize it and say how terrible it is, maybe we could also look at those graves and hear them say to us, yes, this country is worth it, but also say to you and me today, earn this. I died for you. I died that you could be free. I left my family to go fight overseas so that you could be free. Earn this. Jesus Christ says to us, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Jesus did it. He gave everything for us. He looks at you and says, you are worth it. Now let's live our lives in a way that says that we know what a great gift we've received. Earn it.